Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights City Council Public Safety and Health Committee. It's February 24th. It's 4 o'clock. I'd like to call the roll. Jim Posh, Chair, he's here. Vice Chair Gail Larson.
Here.
Member Craig Cobb.
Here.
We have other council members joining us tonight. We have Councilman Petrus and President of Council Tony Kuda. We have an agenda. It's going to start with the Lead Safe 20-year option. This is where we're looking at adjusting our Lead Safe legislation to have a 20-year option. Ms. Larson, would you be kind enough to take us through this?
Was approached recently from a contractor who's working with other property owners that they wanted to know if we had a 20-year certificate in our legislation, and then the law department pointed out to us that no, we don't. So I'm really interested if a property owner is going to go to that extensive work to abate lead that will hold up for 20 years. That seems like a real positive thing. So I'm going to turn it over to you all to explain why we would like to see it in, if you would like to see it in, for one thing, Zach, so.
Oh, absolutely. And we do believe it actually is in the ordinance. When you read it, and because I was going through my conversations with legal as well, it's easy to get confused with this. As far as like one thing on the printout that I did give you was City of Toledo's, City of Cleveland's segment, and then our segment. They're almost all three the same. Now, somebody that's not in this field, in the lead field or the environmental field, is going to look at this and not really be able to decipher what it is. But basically is what it's saying is if someone has gone through those steps of abatement, has gotten that risk assessment, they would be eligible for that 20-year exemption. So it is, we do believe it is in our ordinance and would be acceptable.
Right, and looking through it, they term it an exemption. And they say you have to have it within 20 years, right? That all the requirements of that exemption per the federal regulations of EPA. So if you can meet that within that 20 years, that's the expected lifetime of an abatement for lead work. So I think we can fit it in here, right? When we first reviewed it, we didn't see any very specific options for a 20-year except for that exemption. And reviewing it with the Board of Health, and coming up, Zach's done a great job on putting together a checklist to review when somebody submits something now. So I think, when we get those in, we'd rather see an abatement than, right, the interim controls, right? Because you're removing it and then we don't have to go back for 20 years, right? So it's either removing all the paint or encapsulating it so that it typically, per the definitions of EPA, has a 20-year lifespan.
I think it's really good to see also that this talks about the soil testing, because the testing that I witnessed was just the dust wiping, and it was only interior. And we know that lead-based paint chips fall into or outside, especially if it's an old wood window. So I'm curious though, the legislation as written, when it gets into talking in the detail, talks about a 3-year containment certificate. Do you think that we should, after talking to legal, that we need to amend to make sure that section also addresses the 20-year certificate?
If we wanted to bring it more to the forefront, right, to sort of advertise it. But I think the ordinance as written will probably cover that.
Okay.
Without having to explain that there's 2 different certificates.
Okay, that's important.
Who in the law department have you been talking to? So we could either confirm it or get there.
So I wanted to say it was Chris Hetzel was our assistant law director that we were discussing this with. And again, we had our experts that we go to are reps from the County Board of Health, right? We have Jeff Hanchar is in our office routinely going over the lead abatement program that we administer through housing preservation. And, that extra eye on it to review it with the terminology that it doesn't quite make sense to a layman, right? But makes sense to somebody who's done this lead work the whole time. So, just sort of explaining what these other references are, the CFR 40, right, which is a federal regulation for EPA basically, right? And you're jumping into a couple different definitions, a couple different books. And now that we've identified it in there as an option, we can, set the ball rolling.
And we can advertise sort of this almost with the language that's in here. So
Good.
to be exempt from lead safe for 20 years, this is what you need to do.
So legally, it sounds like we're okay. I mean, administratively, which is a little bit off of our shoulders. I mean, you guys are okay adding this additional certificate within your program. Certificate may not be the right word, but that
Exemption.
that exemption. And do you need funding for that? How does that?
Yeah, I would say with just this in there, shouldn't be too much trouble to adjust. It is more work to go over that report and make sure that all the details of that report are what we need, right? And that if there was any work done on the property, that it matches what the initial paint inspection said, right? So you have to compare a lot of those. But I mean, it's basically the same review. Like anything, right? Any new ordinance passed, right? You have to figure out. And historically, we've always said, yeah, we can do it in-house, we can do it in-house. But when you get all these together and then you want to see, okay, what's the enforcement possibilities on it, we get overwhelmed in a hurry. So I think when we start going through these and reviewing them and see the volume we're getting and what type of cooperation we're getting from the public, there may be a different story to say, hey, we need some more staffing.
It sounds like they'll come and ask us, but you let us know. I mean, really, this is safety for these children has really been important to us all along, all of us.
Right.
And so if there's anything we can do to enhance what you do, if you need assistance or funding for something, that's what Councilor Posh is saying, please let us know. Please let us know.
Yeah, we sort of expect to hear, we expect things to cost more money.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, whatever we can do on our end to facilitate that. I mean, we don't get anything for free, but it's sort of like you already have all these other exemptions teed up and ready to go. Adding this one, it seems to me that incremental difference isn't that great. Yeah, there's definitely a time sink.
Right. Yep.
So, what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think as we get through this program a little more, right, we've had some challenges with rolling out some of the advantages of it. We were giving out some grant dollars for the program, and you all know, you've heard, from our contractors and the public, with the ARPA dollars, trying to get that allocation set and some accounts ready. But we didn't want to totally, move forward with the enforcement of the ordinance and the communication to the public without having that backup set and arranged. So Zach and I are working on, some communication letters to landlords now for people who didn't get their certs in that zone, notifying the next round of people in the next zone. So hopefully we can start ramping up there, and I think that's the telltale sign of what sort of help we need, right?
So we're gonna go to zone 2 now?
Yep.
Yeah, and but once you start advertising that there's 20 years out there as well, would you accept somebody coming to you and say, I want a certificate even though I'm not in the target zone?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're doing that now. If somebody happens to submit for a different zone,
Yeah.
we're not gonna put it aside. We do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Well, I think we can move to the next item.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Questions? Yeah. Thanks for coming in. Moving on, the next item is the immigration raid policy that the city has. I mentioned in our meeting once we had that large number of citizens that came to us expressing concerns regarding the ICE raid at the Cilantro restaurant. I reached out to the mayor's office to get some confirmations attached in your packet. is the police department immigration violation policy and a draft ordinance from 2017 regarding legislation to that the city never passed regarding immigration enforcement. I mean, I have some thoughts on this. I mean, does anybody have any gut feelings on where you think we should go with this as a committee? Any thoughts?
I would like to know how the immigration violations or policy is working in terms of talking to Chief Britton and seeing how it works for them.
Okay.
If they have concerns about some of the wording or if they're able to enforce it the way it is. I also went through and compared the ordinance that was introduced by, at the time, Councilor Sarin, to what they have in policy. And for the most part, the legislation that he wanted to put through is included in the policy already. So I honestly will say I'm a little bit concerned about drawing attention.
Agree?
So that's where I'm at right now.
Yes.
Sure, in respect to the policy manual from the police department, I am assuming that this has been well vetted by our law department and does comply with all aspects of federal and state law. In respect to the ordinance that was introduced back in 2017, I was not on city council at that time. There was a task force that city council appointed to look at this issue. I don't know whether they ever generated a written report. The consensus, at least from a majority of council members, was that enacting this ordinance was not a good idea back in 2017. I know that one concern was whether we would be subjecting inadvertently our police officers to violating this ordinance, which constituted a criminal act. If anything, since 2017, the concerns that Member Larson just expressed about drawing attention to the city should even be more heightened beyond that, because the other concern back in 2017 was the loss of federal funding, which had been threatened. That threat is very real and apparent. In fact, they've started going after some cities for doing that. Also pending down in front of our legislature is a similar bill, I can't recall the number, that would cut off funding to cities that were opposing any efforts to enforce immigration laws. We currently get, I don't know how much our community development block grant funding, we would put that potentially at risk, as well as any other federal funding or grants that we are pursuing. And if you recall from the recent legislature that we approved for the consultant that applies for grants from the federal government and the state, you can see how many grants we have either received or applied for. I don't want to put that unnecessarily in jeopardy. And then the other concern is we still have hanging out there a determination to be made by the EPA and or the Justice Department about what's going to happen with our sewer system and bringing it into compliance, and how much that's going to cost and how long they're going to give us to make those repairs. Again, if this current administration wants to be super punitive, I have no doubt that they would, and we got on the radar, that they would direct the Justice Department to do what they could to hurt the city in terms of the cost that they would impose on us to bring our sewers into compliance. That was a long rambling comment, but that's my view on it.
there was a report and I just sent it to you guys.
Any other thoughts from
Did they
anybody
re-
around the table?
Did they reach a conclusion?
From looking through it, it kind of just seems like they essentially put together the policy that's in place. But I'm not sure if they concluded one way or another about legislation.
Found a couple other pieces of relevant legislation.
This is an executive, is it?
No.
Come on
I
in,
just wanted to
stay close if you'd like.
Oh, I'm
All
always
it's-
sick. I'm just kidding.
All it says is members discussed extensively proposed resolution 15, 2017, attempted to reach consensus which was not successful.
15,
But it says
2027.
representatives of city staff continued to express opposition to legislation. Ultimately, the law department requested the issue be discussed by city council. But that's as far as I got apparently.
What was that legislation number?
15, 2017,
Ordinance or resolution?
resolution.
That's the welcoming city legislation. And then there's also, what is this? This is 32, 2018, which established this task force.
Does anybody have any additional thoughts? I mean, I've got some I'd like to share, but I'd like to hear from everybody else first.
Fine.
So I do think it makes sense to have a conversation with the police chief on seeing how the administrative policy is working out. And it probably makes sense to have a conversation with law. I mean, I can't imagine something not going into our police department policy manual that was not legal. I suppose that's not the word I'm looking for or phrase I'm looking for. I'm relatively certain that it's, maybe what I would do is just start with the police chief and get the sense of what the police chief has to say. I am very, very concerned about the punitive nature of this administration at the federal level, hurting the city. I mean, if we have strong, not that we're bending to constituents that were speaking to us. I mean, we had some good folk come to our meeting expressing concerns. I'm walking away from that meeting that they were pleased that we actually had an administrative policy. They were looking for us to do something possibly a little bit stronger. But if the administrative policy solves the root cause of if it addresses their root cause, I mean, I think I think maybe it's possibly a good place to stop, because I am kind of concerned about the retribution piece. I mean, with the sewer issue, there's millions and millions of dollars at stake that the city is going to lose, or not have the money to, repair our sewers, for example, if we don't get an EPA finding that is reasonable. So why don't I start having this conversation with the police chief, and I will circle back with everybody.
Thank you, that helps, that'd be helpful.
Moving into the next item, the crime data update and review. So I don't know if you noticed on the city website, the police department page, we have 4 years worth of additional crime data that has been sort of backfilled from the last time we actually looked at it. And I have included 2 heat maps that were actually also up on the website right now for 2024. There's additional heat maps, I believe, in the works. I kind of assume that, but it seems like this is a nice way to give us the opportunity to start reviewing some crime information. I was going to start doing some comparisons. I did have a conversation with the police chief regarding a substation in the Noble area at the request of Council President Cobb. And his general response is, you know, crime in that neighborhood is pretty down. I'm not sure it's necessary. And I don't know if that's sort of what caused us to be able to see this kind of data.
I'm sorry, crime in what neighborhood?
In the Noble neighborhood.
Okay.
But the issue here is, I mean, at least we have some data that we're able to look at to try to help us make some of those decisions if we wanted to try to push for funding in some areas. I'd almost like to ask the police department if they can maybe walk us through some of this stuff. Anybody have any thoughts?
The response that we often get to citizens' concerns about speeding, about crime rate, is that's the perception of the citizens and may not necessarily be confirmed by data.
Right.
In my heart, in my mind, that perception is extremely important. So if there's any way that the chief can see to, if he hasn't already, make sure that the police presence is increased, and therefore, that's one thing about the substation, right? If we could get a precinct, whether they modify precinct number 3 or they do something else, or a storefront perhaps, it's a substation. I just think that would be much appreciated by the citizens. So that's why I'm supportive of what President Kuda has requested, and I don't know how you balance out those two statements, they contradict each other in a way. If the crime rate's down, but is it down enough for people to feel safe? I don't know.
So, I mean, you could see, from the map, I'm looking at this map,
Mhm.
that the crime is sparse on the south end, and, obviously it's heats up the more north you go. But I guess what these statistics show is that it's not increasing over time. Is that basically what you look at 20?
Well, this data is brand new to us, so I haven't had time to dig into the numbers to make that particular determination. I mean, the numbers we get are aggregated across the entire city. That's what gets published. The heat mapping is actually where we're able to look at things more like by neighborhood.
Right.
So we would need to have the equivalents of this
For other years.
for years prior.
I mean, but the preliminary report from the chief was that it's not increasing, right?
It was the crime in that neighborhood wouldn't be able to, you'd have to hear how he phrases it. But the
Okay.
impression I was left with, that the crime in that neighborhood would not justify its own standalone police presence. That is maybe more based on fact as opposed to perception, though.
Right.
We've seen that, where
Understood.
people are concerned that there's too many speeders on their street, but when you actually put a sensor on that street, they really don't have high traffic in the street.
But again, if it was hearing gunshots or somebody was hurt by a gunshot or the speeder was going 50, a few speeders go 50 or 60 miles an hour. When you average it out, it's not so bad, but if you look at the trend line, perception's influenced by those incidents that are most serious, perceptions of safety.
Right. Anybody else have any additional thoughts regarding this?
This is an interesting map, and if you know, you take a look at it, the hot spot for property crimes is actually down in the Cedar Fairmount and the Mayfield Road area.
Yeah, North Coventry.
It's pretty startling.
How do you that's
And then, you know, the violent crimes, there is a block up in the Noble neighborhood, but then we've got hot spots at Cedar and Lee, in the business
Right, that's
district,
true.
and where our high school is, and extending, down all the way to, Mayfield. And then, another hot spot on the other side of Cedar, again, in our commercial business district. But I'm glad that this data has finally been posted.
Yes, very good to see it.
I would agree with that. Any other thoughts?
Were these maps that already existed that someone shared with you, or did someone create them for the committee?
So when I initially met with the police chief, he basically said that he did not have any heat maps at that time. So I think after that conversation I had with him, I don't know what happened. It could have been a conversation I think I shared with both of them, with the mayor, possibly an email between the two. I think I sent an email to the two. It could have just been something that was in the works too, I don't know.
So when we get a chance, we can go back and look at those previous years that they posted as well.
Well, at this point, there's only the 2024 up on the website. And you have to look at it, it's on the left hand, the heat maps are on the left hand navigation pane.
Okay, thank you. It's a good visual though when you have the heat map, isn't it?
It is a good visual, it's, I think for us as a council, it's a starting point to see, you know, what areas of town might need additional dollars
Yeah.
for something.
So do we don't have statistics for like 22 and 23,
We have statistics,
but not maps?
but not maps.
Got it, okay, that was gonna.
I'm gonna move on to the next item unless anybody has any other questions. So in our last meeting, we talked about Shaker's Listening Project and the survey that they did. And then we talked about the last several surveys that Cleveland Heights did. And they used a firm called ETC. And we were gonna go back and I'll do a little bit of homework and look at what the ETC surveys did. The last one was in 2020. It was a City of Cleveland Heights community survey. In one of our last meetings with the mayor, I forget which one, honestly, I believe it was a finance committee meeting possibly.
Yes.
It was a finance committee meeting. I asked the mayor, is this something that we could, it was when we were talking with our communications department. I asked the mayor if there was willingness from the administration to do a Cleveland Heights community satisfaction survey like we had done. The mayor essentially, and I can't quote him for sure, but essentially what I interpreted his response back was, yeah, I wouldn't, it would be interesting to see one, but very reluctant on doing a community survey. This particular year, he cited some politic reasons for it. But it was very clear it was not something that was on his radar, and the administration was not gonna do it this year. They might be interested in doing it next year. On my own, I've reached out to ETC to see if it's something that, maybe council can fund and do on our own. I know the administration is busy. We've basically heard that they're not interested in doing it, but if we can do the same type of ETC and manage that engagement, which is pretty much a complete outsourced endeavor, is it something that we should consider doing? I mean, the takeaway from our last committee meeting was the consensus that I heard from this committee is we should look at one. We should really consider doing one. It really is a good benchmark to measure what are the hot spots that need to get done, hence funded. So I'd like to continue pursuing this. Before I say anything more, does anybody have any thoughts?
Would you add in here a survey of deer? Could that be combined into a survey that we do? The issues that deer
I mean,
causing?
yeah.
Like deer-related questions or an actual survey of deer?
No, that's really good, because I have 3 that are living in my backyard right now. Thank you very much, sir. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, a survey of the opinion that people have of the problem that deer are causing.
But not tracking down like the number of deer in the city.
Not with this tool, no.
Okay.
Well, they're residents that they're living in your backyard, so technically the deer in your backyard are residents, so they could get included.
I'll take my
We could ask-
clipboard out there and ask them.
Can I ask a question? I wanna do this, is there some pushback on calling the deer?
Oh, yeah.
There has been,
Shaker does it.
Yeah.
Beechwood does it.
And to me, always the biggest issue was, is there, because there comes a food supply issue with the number of deer that are out there. And the more that are out there, the less they have. And so as we've done these things, because I did it right behind my house, because it's on the metro parks, and I never knew they were there unless they would have told me. Now, it's a pretty safe endeavor. I know there's some fear out there, like a wild shot, and and in talking with Shaker, I mean, they were pretty, adamant on, although they did get, I think, some pushback on that side too. I don't wanna say humanity, there's some, the supply of what's out there for the deer that are out there that just becomes not good for them.
So we have heard from residents that our city is being deforested because of the deer.
I mean,
And this is just what residents have told us. But we're, one of the things on this agenda is a public forum that brings in ODNR to sort of talk about the best practices. What's concerning, and it's something that I do think we need to put in the budget for next year, is a deer survey. This is, we're sort of changing topics here. It's not this ETC resident satisfaction survey, but it's really a survey to really see where you are with deer population in your community. And they do that a number of different ways, infrared flights. Most cities that have an active deer management program do regular surveys in their areas just to see really the extent of the problem. At this point, without any data, I couldn't even tell you it's a problem or not, except that we're sort of an island where no one has really looked at it. Now, I want to be clear, when we approached the administration in the past, the administration was waiting to get the feedback from the sterilization program that was going on in South Euclid, our neighboring city, South Euclid. And that information is just recently available. But they do sort of a hybrid approach where there's a sterilization program and there's a culling program in South Euclid.
have you ever done a tree survey?
Yeah.
Like Nelson or Davey or anybody, I mean, like where they kind of did drones and they could tell how many trees per acre because this is what they do. To kind of give you a sense of, whether there's more trees this year than there were last or.
So what we've heard, and again, these are residents sort of like behind the Shaker area, or not Shaker, behind Severance.
Yeah.
they've complained to us that there is no vegetation in that area. It's just eaten all the way down to the ground.
If I may?
Yeah.
Also, in the past, Mayor Serna said he was not interested in a calling program. So,
This is just from my knowledge.
yes. But definitely he was waiting to see the results and now we have the results. Is South Euclid going to be able to come to the public hearing?
We're not there yet in the
Okay.
planning, but that's.
Okay.
So a couple of things, I was interviewed about this, some reporter from Cleveland.com. The definition of culling, I mean, I said that I was only for the spading and neutering of the animals and not for the killing of them, but he said that's culling. Is that true? I mean, I don't know, I never actually looked it up, but
I think it's culling potential, you know what I mean? Like,
well, if you're just decreasing the population by any means, is that culling? Or does it have to be, euthanizing the animals in some way? So that was kind of one thing that I'm not sure of, after listening to people complaining about that, the article and the implications. Mayor did say that he wasn't for culling at this time. South Euclid is, I can't remember if it's spading or neutering, but I got an email from their, very recently, within the last week, from their council president that they want to get council presidents together and talk about this, because the idea that some suburb could unilaterally make a dent in this is almost amusing. I mean, we either do it, kind of as a group, or I don't even know if we're doing anything that would matter.
So all the neighboring communities have programs, except East Cleveland, the city of Cleveland and us.
Yeah.
I don't believe UH has it,
Okay.
unless they've added one recently.
But if you're gonna do the neutering of animals, that's a community can take this on, culling the traditional term of that and do that. But you're not gonna make a dent in anything unless you're, doing some wide swath of spading and neutering animals.
Well, I think before we could even suggest that we walk down a calling, however you define it, program is, I think we really need to have the data. We've had residents express concerns to us about safety issues regarding deer. It's probably one of the top 5 things we hear about as council people. I mean, not that we want to go with what the crowd is yelling at it, but
I think the Environmental Sustainability Committee did they did some study on this. Laura, help me, Marks.
I talked to Laura Marks.
Yeah,
about
I think she did something, or the committee did something.
She's very concerned about the what her term is deforestation. I would invite her to the public forum.
If I may, the recommendation that came out of the committee was to have the ODNR do a survey as a starting point, so you have a baseline.
I think the issue is we need to have a survey. Without a survey, I don't think we can.
Justify.
We can't make a database, a data-driven decision without really having an idea. I mean, if ODNR says, yeah, here's your survey, you really don't have a problem, I think then we can realize we don't have a problem. But if someone does a survey and interprets the data and says, oh, you have a very, very large problem, then I think then at that point, we need to look for solutions for that. But until we have the data, I don't think we can. I mean, I will tell you, one of the agenda items is, what can we do? Are there anything on this table that we're talking about that impact our capital budget or our budget? And one of the things on there is doing a survey deer management survey.
During the last public safety meeting, didn't we talk about it being like $1,500, like something like pretty small?
It was $1,700 when Laura Marks and the committee recommended it, which would have been at least 2 years ago. So there's probably been some increment, but it's still very reasonable.
It's not $50,000.
And ODNR likes to do them in the fall, so we have time.
And also I'm aware that ODNR has seminars where municipalities can send folks to learn about deer management
Yes.
techniques.
Yeah.
My understanding based on conversations with ODNR is that that's something that we are not taking advantage of, but I think would be helpful if the administration sent folks to these events.
Or council people.
Yeah, we've actually had them come into a training for clerks as well before,
Oh.
NEOMCA.
I guess I would say as a committee member, I'm for both of these surveys. So, but I think the ODNR is accomplishable. I think we can get that paid for and ordered and have them ready to go in the fall.
So,
This one is gonna be a little bit more,
yeah, well, I'm gonna, we're sort of talking about the deer management, I'm gonna go back to the community
Yeah.
survey. Do we have a consensus of, I mean, first of all, we were talking about having a public forum about this particular issue. We have a tentative date of March 18th between 6 and 8 o'clock.
I'm sorry, what was the date?
March 18th on Tuesday, it's a Tuesday, from 6 to 8.
for the public forum, number 6 on your agenda.
It's number 6.
I'm sorry, what time's that again?
Tentatively set for 6 o'clock. We haven't done any advertising because we have not invited anybody to the forum or see. It's on my ever-growing list of things to get to Addie, but I was gonna get the ODNR contact information to Addie just to see if we can get someone scheduled. You know, my general feeling is if we can get someone scheduled in the next week or so from ODNR, I think we can fill in the other blanks. But if not, we probably need to push this public forum until April.
Sounds good.
Do we have consensus if that's okay?
Yeah.
And I think once we actually get that, it would make sense, I think, for us to talk to our administration, make sure they understand, you know, where we're going with this, just to see if you could add any value or if there's any concerns about it, let's get that figured out.
The community survey?
No, this is the deer management.
Oh, I would only add, Ms. Petrus, I mean, when you, I'm trying to figure out what department would be in charge of kind of that. You know what I mean, the best practices. I don't know if they teach you how to do some things, how would, what department maybe, you know what I mean? Just gonna have to give it some thought. There's some
I
expert.
think that's a question for the administration, like.
I know, and
which
I'm
is-
trying to answer it. Yeah, and I'm saying it'd be difficult to say, okay, well,
I think you're gonna find this police.
I think you,
Maybe that's wrong.
you'd get some cursory push it. Maybe it's park and rec. Maybe it's like planting these things so they do this. Okay. But if it's, depending on what the program calls for, but I don't know of a, well, you don't have does the county do animal control? Who does your animal control? Stray dogs and cats?
Yeah.
Here in this city?
Yes.
I mean, the police,
I don't know
if
that
an animal
anyone
dies,
does.
Okay,
there's no animal control.
right.
Yeah, there is.
So, but if there's a stray dog or a cat, who goes and gets it?
The police usually go get them.
I'm sorry?
The police usually go get them.
Okay. I'm surprised the county doesn't have a program that does.
The health, they
Not
use,
for us.
no, they don't do it for us.
Okay. I just wondered.
Okay, anything else regarding the public forum for deer management before I go back to the resident survey? I'd like to try to see if there's best practices out there, if we're able, if council's actually commission this, or if they're typically done through the administration. So I'd like to try to reach out.
University Heights, they do both. I'm sorry, that was a bit. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't, but maybe
Oh, yeah.
Recording.
We can edit that out.
Oh, well, we're not editing anything out for the record. I know it's a joke.
Yeah.
Would be best if we were working with the administration on this particular survey.
Well, it is, but the way I look at it is a lot of the stuff is the same old stuff that they've been asking every other year, stopping in 2020, and it's not rocket science for you. I mean, if we're gonna get a bad outcome because we're doing this and the administration is not doing it, then I think we can give that some consideration. What bothered me was the comment that was made that, people are gonna politicize it. I just can't see how that, and this is not a political survey. I mean, you hire political survey people if you're trying to get a political survey. This is not one of them. And this is pretty common. It's a common tool that cities use when they sort of try to get some data measurements on themselves. President?
So for budgeting purposes, I think, for council in particular, I think this could be very enlightening. Dissatisfaction in certain areas, if it's widespread, then we turn to that department, for instance. I don't wanna get specific because I don't have any data, and just say, well, if people are this dissatisfied with this particular service, maybe we need to look at, personnel, equipment, and what have you. And do we need to, is there a funding solution? Because you don't wanna just throw money at something, but if there's something we can do because people are waiting too long for it to happen, or it's not being done properly, or there's some lack of equipment, that would probably shine a light on that. I think where these things can get political is when questions are slipped in about, how am I doing as mayor? How is, there's, you want to avoid those kind of things that obviously.
You can couch those in right track, wrong track too. I mean, there's plenty of ways to verbiage these things, and my only thing is that typically these are done post-electoral. Not that they're not done before, but if you would do that, it's quite easily, you could take an issue or two, slap it on a mailer. I mean, I'm not saying it's gonna be used that way, it's just, I have a jaded view sometimes, I'm sorry. But there's just that perception of, that's not the reality, like you talked about. It's the perception that's saying, okay, this is gonna happen. And it may look like that to some. And I'm not saying it's valid or not, but it's the viewpoint.
So there are these push surveys and we, there is a rocky relationship between council and the administration and the mayor. I mean, we have seen that play out. This is not trying to have an outside firm to ask how the mayor is doing. I would not propose.
No,
any-
nobody is, I'm saying,
I'm not.
I'm just saying that's how it could.
Well, it could, but I
Yeah.
guess what I'm stating, at least, again, this is a council decision. I'm not looking for this survey to act as that purpose. I'm looking for this survey to, what's the first question here that they ask? There's a question regarding enforcing exterior maintenance of residential property, and in 2020, that was a 47% approval, and in 2018, it was a 39% approval. So, I mean, these are low numbers, but I mean, where are we with that? I mean, can we get that data for 2023 or 2024? I mean, that's what I'm looking for, sort of a non-political, keep politics out of this and just so we can look at this so we know what needs to get funded and not get funded. But what I would like to do is come up with a couple things that we can actually make sure that it's in some budget going forward before we complete this budget cycle. I mean, we already talked about a survey for deer management. I would also like to include some budget money to do a survey like this that ETC uses, whether that is done in conjunction with the administration or whether it's done standalone by council. So with those two, I've got other things to add to that, but does anybody curious to see if I have consensus on that? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? No.
Well, I would like to see a survey done again. This was done back when we had a city manager. I don't know what we spent for it. I was gonna take a quick look to see whether I could find it online, if it required city council approval, because the cost was over X amount.
So Shaker recently had the survey done and I just put a message into the project manager for that, who ran that project at ETC.
But I do think to, remove any political issue out of it, the questions should be pretty similar to what were asked before. And if you want to have be able to see some comparison in whether the survey responses improved or went down, which is what they did before, then you should ask the same questions again.
That's what I would,
And there's nothing political about this survey.
yeah, I would stay away from anything regarding the mayoral form of government.
I'm really happy that we worked with ETC a number of years so that we could get data over time, observe trends. It sounds like a great idea to engage with them again and ask similar questions. Even if we are not asking things specific about like satisfaction, I still think that even something like what issues do you care about most is something that could benefit candidates who are running for an office. And so feels like that's something that's more appropriately paid for by a campaign or through, someone getting out there and talking with residents. And so for that reason, I think that I would support, having, if we wanted to have a survey, support, waiting until November or December for it to go out. Maybe get the ball rolling this year in working with the firm and crafting questions, things like that, but wait until after the election to actually initiate the survey.
Or alternatively, have it done and instruct them not to release the results until after the election.
I'd be curious to know what the price is. If you could get that information, that'd be helpful.
Any other thoughts on the survey and that? Is there some other budget items I was gonna ask about in the next 5 minutes or so we have for this meeting? So we've talked about traffic calming multiple times in this committee. And we talked about things like, well, can we at least please get some speed humps, speed bumps, speed tables on Lee Road? Are there things, and I've heard that there's been recommendations in the past where council has given money for traffic calming, for example, on Coventry Road. Are there things that we can do regarding traffic calming that we should discuss with our other council peers to get included in the budget for 2025?
I'm concerned we have that $800,000 federal grant for Safe Streets for Us. We have budgeted in the mayor's budget $200,000 as the matching amount. So we have $1 million And apparently these are not just demonstration, the wording of the grant looked like it was just demo only. We need permanent speed or traffic calming. We don't need more demonstrations. I did request last year $400,000. It was an add to the budget for traffic calming. And Director Klingscale did use all that money, but none of it went towards Coventry. So that was disappointing. And as I've told this story before, we agreed in council that the ARPA funds that the Coventry people had asked for $28,000 for the traffic calming, especially where cars are parking in crosswalks or pedestrians don't feel safe. We didn't fund that $28,000 because the city was going to go and do that work. And so I would like to see that work done this year, Coventry. In any other places where the city deems it important because it's citywide, right? It's citywide. So
Have we determined what traffic calming measures work best and are effective short of the speed bumps that we've been putting down? Is that
I mean,
is it-
chicanes, for example, if you have like a bump out, that's something whenever you have cars coming in opposite directions, you clearly have to slow down because only one of you can get through at a certain time. The flexi posts, a lot of people feel that those are helpful at narrowing people's field of view. There are a lot of different things that have been shown to have benefit. My view, for example, on Lee Road is that you need to slow cars down, things that will physically slow them down. Because whenever you put up those crosswalks with the flashing lights, it's a false sense of security. People just drive through them. So as I've continued to talk about on this issue, feel very strongly about it. I am tired of continuing to hear about police reports about pedestrians and cyclists getting hit. It's still happening. And something more has to happen. I'm glad that we have this $1 million for next year. I'm glad that Director Zamp said that they're hiring an outside firm to ensure that it gets done. But stuff has to happen on Coventry and Lee Road. And I feel, honestly, at this point, I feel that the administration has been ignoring me on this. And I don't know, what else we need to do, but it has to be a priority for 2025.
So the work that I've seen the planning department do has been pretty stellar, but their planning, they don't necessarily execute. And they don't necessarily have the budget to execute on things that they come up with. Sort of the Safe Streets for Cleveland Heights is a remarkable product, okay? It pretty much tells you where things are, where they have a plan. There's also the issue of funding these things. I mean, I guess what I'm suggesting is, we control this purse. What I'd like to do is put some money in the budget for some of these things and leave it to the experts to do the work. And I would think that we have expertise in-house. But give them the money so that they can do the work. I'm sorry, I have one other thing, because I don't see it in the budget except for the $200,000.
During one of the budget-related conversations, I asked whether anything more was going to be requested, and we were told no. But I think that we need to understand what the $1 million is going to cover, and so that we can ask, okay, do you need more, so that we can ensure that there's adequate funds for also Coventry and Lee Road and other places. Because maybe it's the case that Director Zamp feels that the $1 million for this year is sufficient. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe $1 million is sufficient, but we need to make sure that something happens in those two locations.
I have to start a meeting pretty soon.
Well, we are finishing up right now. Can I have some time with you to discuss this, since these are departments that roll up into your department, just to make sure that we can
Clint and I
look at?
talked
Let's do that.
a number of things. Traffic calm, it's not that it shouldn't be done, don't get me wrong, it's about like what's the best use of it and how do you get, but speeding is just 4.
Okay.
But yeah, sure, no problem.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll send you an email and kind of go from there, or do you wanna do it now?
No, because we have a 5 o'clock meeting.
Yeah, I'll
So-
send you an email.
Good, so it's 5 o'clock, we're gonna end this meeting. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.